I am a believer who struggles with relationship issues, sexual addiction, financial chaos, ego, lack of a proper diet, exercise, and self-care, control issues, anger problems, especially when sending emails. And I'm grateful to be here today. My name is Brandon. I grew up in a Christian home raised by Christian parents. They married on August 2nd, 1975, and I was born 2 years later on September 5th, 1977. I was the son of a choir director and a track coach. I got front row access to choir rooms, stages, and pianos before I was even tall enough to sit on one. Music was in our family DNA, and I ultimately became a musician, the same as my father before me, a legacy that I've tried my best to carry forward. Life seemed perfect until 1984. My father had been a school teacher, a choir director, and a track coach as long as I had been alive, and all of a sudden the insurance industry called to him to start a new career. The only drawback, this job would require him to leave our home in Linwood, Washington, and move to Portland, Oregon. I don't know what all of the circumstances were, but for reasons that later became clear, we did not go, and he left and moved out to accept the job supporting us from another state while I grew up without a father in my orbit. It was painful and later turned into a near divorce between my parents. This is the first time that I can remember seeing real-life examples of relationship issues. 1984 really was a game changer for my family, with two major events happening the same year. My 7th birthday, which was also the first day of first grade, I was called into the principal's office over the intercom to find my father waiting for me. He broke the unhappy news that my grandfather Jack had passed away. It was a heavy, and it happened on my birthday. Later that year, after my father moved out of our home in Linwood for his temporary apartment in Portland to take that job in the insurance industry, my grandmother, who had just been widowed, moved in with us. My understanding was that she could look after us, but I think it went both ways. Now, with my father out of the home, the balance of power in our home shifted to my grandmother being the one in charge of discipline, and over the process of several years of intense conflicts my siblings and I would have with her. Now, part of taking accountability and ownership of our side of the street is recognizing what we did with other people, right? And that our actions have real consequences. I'd finally hit a point where all of my youthful anger and rage became directed at my grandmother, to the point where I sat her down in front of a TV in 1988, and I put on a VHS copy, this is really immature, but I put on a VHS copy of a Billy Crystal and Danny DeVito movie called Throw Mama from the Train. And before I hit the play button, I looked her straight in the eyes and I said, "This is what we would like to do to you, Grandma." Now, it's pretty immature, but I could tell that it had an impact. So what I'd like to say is that the ability to use words to tear down another human being should never be done. My heart is filled with sadness, regrets, and remorse for the years of words spoken aloud. I have to live with the memories of what I did both to her and others throughout my whole life. The key to harmony in families is not one we naturally want to apply. Ephesians 5:21 says, "Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ." Submission is in direct opposition to our flesh's desire to rule and have its way. We defend our rights, champion our causes, defend our opinions, and assert our own agendas whenever possible. But God's way is to crucify our flesh, Galatians 5:24 and Romans 6:11, and submit to the needs and wishes of others whenever we can. Jesus is our model for that kind of submission to God's will. 1 Peter 2:23 says, "When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly." In 1988, my mother became very ill and bedridden, and she was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. This started a chain of events 30 years ago that has led to where we are today. I will never forget being sat down at age 11 and told it was time for a difficult adult conversation. They had a miracle-like drug to give to my mother that would get her up and out of bed and restore the quality of life for her, but it would take her life in 10 years, and that I needed to basically prepare myself for the end of her life. This moment in my childhood marked the beginning of my mother's long suffering and has been the story of our lives. In the summer of 1990, we had an emergency family event happen that affected us as a whole. We had a situation where two siblings were fighting in the back of the car. We were parked in downtown Edmonds, and my mother was actually trying to break up the fight, and someone watching us from a restaurant misinterpreted what they saw and called the police. We were all taken in for questioning. I was 12 years old and in a police station for the first time. My siblings were all considerably younger, and God only knows how they dealt with this experience. We were told by the police that they were taking us away to a foster home for observation. 3 of us were taken to one foster home, which turned out to be the pastor of a local church, and our sister was sent to a separate home. But little did we know that behind the scenes, our father had driven into town, and our parents, along with their friends and an attorney, were making a considerable effort to get us back from the state. It took 1 full week before we were reunited. Now, us being taken away by Children's Services quickly became an all-hands-on-deck emergency that you would expect it to be. A reunification plan was put on the table for this family. We moved out of our home at Edmonds, Washington, to join our father in a brand new home here in Milwaukie, Oregon. This was our new family home, and the plan was working at first. We had about 1 year from 1990 to 91 where our grandmother did not live with us. And then in 1991, however, something changed, and she moved in with us again. However, sadly, a downturn in the economy affected my father's work, and in November 1993, we lost our family home to a foreclosure. I have no words for which to describe to you the pain that I felt in my heart when I watched the sheriff tape a notice to our door that this home had been foreclosed, and it now belonged to the bank, and we were given orders to leave. My father and I were the last to leave, and we drove down to a restaurant called Hales down in McLaughlin, if any of you know it. As long as I live, I will never be able to get the image out of my head of my father and I sharing a breakfast in total silence together after the sheriff had walked us out the door at Hales. This was a devastating emotional event that left us no alternative but to cram all 7 of us into a motel room with 2 beds while we tried to navigate the reality that we had all just become homeless as a family. I got lost inside my head, and I hid in the corner of the motel room, writing a fiction novel so that I could float away and exist anywhere else other than being in the motel room with my entire family. If there was a hell, surely my family was living in it at that moment. Then one day we found a rental home and left that motel for yet another new house together. During my early teenage years, I began to pay less and less attention to God and His message for me, and I began to focus on relationships, then sex, shortly followed by my long relationship with drugs and alcohol. As one breakup became another, and I began to feel a darkness surrounding me, I saw a movie in 1994 where a character damned himself and everyone around him, and I too began to believe that I was the damned. I believed that no one did or could ever love me. My empathy for others eroded and gave way to selfish and ambitious young musician who was more consumed with fame and popularity, not afraid to pay any price to achieve it. I sacrificed all of the opportunities before me to have any kind of genuine relationships, caring friendships, the healing of the word. I traded it all for flesh, drugs, and rock and roll. My entire world, emotions, and life perspective began to change and take darker and darker turns as my binges on heavier drugs took hold. The transition from teenager living at home to a young man living on my own finally happened. In the year 2000, I never really came out. I just became one overnight. And in that same year, I was awarded the keys to my first ever apartment. And although the internet was brand new, it was in its infancy, I still managed to find my way into those first chat rooms. And I began meeting people and more people. Now, one thing that I will say, we all run the risk of getting close to someone and getting burned, betrayed, or hurt. But one of the first things that happened to me in the dating world was the one thing that no one is prepared for. Someone that I was dating passed away suddenly. On the night that I found out that Austin died, I ran out of my apartment in the middle of the night to a church down on River Road. It was Christmas time, so they had a nativity scene set up. At 2 a.m., I climbed up onto the nativity scene, and I lay at the feet of baby Jesus, and I wept, and I wept, and I wept. I had never known a loss like this before, and Jesus was the only thing I could think to turn to at that moment. His death really shook me and made me disconnect from emotions and opening up to others. Now, flash forward to 3 years later in 2003, someone that I met online that I thought I trusted tried to murder me in my own home. But I fought back. I wanted to live for myself and for my mother more than anything. The man who tried to kill me was placed in handcuffs and taken away to jail, where he served 6 months. This should have woken me up. I was attacked and almost murdered by someone that I met in an online chat room and invited into my home. But that was not enough of a 2x4 to shake me out of my addiction. Even my own near-death experience did not stop the trajectory that I was on. It was 10 years later and further into my addiction that I could have ever realized that the bottom went when I started down a dark path of mistakes and poor choices that would eventually lead to my arrest and facing up to 20 years in prison. Some of the things that I'm hoping others can understand and relate to are relationship issues. I believe that relationship issues are at the very core of most of my life's major events. By believing that only intimate relationships can fall under the label of relationships, I miss the whole point completely, that everyone in your life is some type of relationship. Friends, co-workers, churchgoers, doctors, your lawyer, your bank teller, the cashier who took your order, the person you put a ring on their finger. The one leap forward that I believe I've made through this whole process of recovery is to evaluate all my relationships. And the changes that I see are fulfilling. During the darkest depth of my drug binges, I could be surrounded by people all the time, yet I felt completely disconnected and isolated. Everyone wanted to be my drug friend, which only led to more parties and riskier choices. And the lie that I believed at the time was that the drug people in my life were my real friends. I have had no success at ever making good decisions on drugs. Can anyone here relate to that? Getting arrested is what it took to shake me awake from my own addictive and compulsive behaviors and actions. It was the 2x4 that God used to knock me off my winning streak. Now, how many people came through these doors on a winning streak like I did? Okay, all right. How many people here thank God that we are here right now, today?
Amen.
My relationship to God has been a powerful journey ever since I was 6 years old in 1981. I will never forget my father asking me to accept the Lord as my Savior in a moving U-Haul that day in 1981. As I closed my eyes and we said the Lord's Prayer together, I opened them and I was born again into salvation and the blood of Jesus. I immediately began my life as a young Christian, starting out first in Sunday school, which quickly turned into Vacation Bible School and Awanas and so forth and so forth. There's a whole trajectory for that. I even got to play Jesus in a church musical in 1987. It's Cool in the Furnace is a musical about Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they cast me to play Jesus. I'm serious. So the setup was simple. As Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were burning in the furnace over here, I came dancing on stage wearing sunglasses, kind of like a Twin Peaks character, and literally Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego danced around me as we're singing It's Cool in the Furnace. So I'd like to revive that role. Don't ever let anyone tell you that the 1980s weren't amazing. For me, they were amazing. Now, I have 3 lowest points in my life and recovery journey that I want to share with you today. Following the events that took place at a party in 1997, someone at a party was making some type of an accusation against me. As the fear began to grow, I felt a darkness and disconnection from this world unlike anything I had ever felt before. The vision, the very idea of being arrested, put on display in a court of law, having my life and reputation ruined was an overwhelming worry thought. As a result of my fear and thinking errors, I decided to end my life that night. Out of respect for everyone's triggers and safety, I won't say how, but I will say that I was serious and that I did make the attempt. Like everything else in life, I also failed in my effort to end my own life. Having lost people to suicide in the years since, I can only say this. If there is something that I could say to them, If there's something that I could do, I would do so. There's nothing more powerful than this final decision. The second bottom for me would have to be my divorce. It took a lot of courage and faith asking my friends and family to support my wedding during a time when both the licenses themselves were in legal limbo. It was also a new relationship, barely 6 months old, and not everyone had a chance to meet my partner. So when that marriage went sideways, I chose a path which is ultimately in my top 10 list of the biggest regrets of my entire life. I kept my marital problems a secret from everyone. Less than 30 days after the wedding, I was attacked violently. At the time, I was so much more traumatized by who it was than what had happened from the physical pain I took from the beating. The psychological impact of becoming a victim of domestic assault at my own husband's hands forced me to keep the violence a secret, pushed me so far inside of myself that I literally created an alternate reality. I created an alternate reality of what was happening for both friends, family, and anyone. God was not in my life during this era. I had somehow turned away from him again. When we got a divorce, it hit me so hard that I did not want to live at all. After my divorce, I felt so lost in every single way that I had to eventually discover on my own how much I needed God's love and understanding back in my life, which unfortunately didn't happen right away, which leads us up to my trial in 2013. For me, the absolute lowest point was being placed under arrest and charged by a secret grand jury with over 20 years' worth of felony charges. At the time of my arrest, I was armed and a legal concealed carry holder with no criminal background who had passed 2 Homeland Security background checks. My family became my heroes during the time of my trial, by the way. The ways in which they banded together and we navigated this emergency together speaks about the love that a family has for each other. I am eternally grateful for my family's love and support, and I know that that's not true for everyone. I know that. 2 of my best friends, however, chose to end our friendships forever during my trial. Through the entire process since the time of my arrest in 2013 until this very day, I have wanted nothing more than to have my friends back. I lost 2 best friends because of my trial, and I have always considered that to be an unacceptable loss. But it's his will, not mine. There are some steps that I'd like to point out that speak to me. Step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. When I read old journals, I see a lot of pain and anger. And I see a lot of grieving over the loss of relationships, isolation from people, places, and things. And although through it all, I believe that I could do it under my own will and control and make everything work out the way I believed it should be, put it in an email. Now, how did that work out for me, really? How did that work out for any of you who are here tonight? I needed to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to some type of sanity from the insanity that was repeating the same actions over and over again, expecting a different result each time. The very definition of insanity. The answer to this question is and will always be Jesus. I also feel that step 9 speaks to me. Step 9, we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Oh, talk about a heavy, right? There are people in this very room, in this town, and in many other towns, and in some cases people who are no longer with us, that I owe an amends to. If I was to say these words to everyone, to do it more broadly, I can say only this. I am sorry for all of the words or deeds that I have done that have hurt you. Thank you for the time that we did have together and that you gave your love and trust to me. I am sorry that I broke that trust or that I broke your heart in some way. In case I see you again in this life or the next lifetime, up there with him, I would just like to say that you touched me and that I feel blessed to have known you in this place. I have no resentments. I have only love and forgiveness in my heart, and I humbly ask for yours. Now, there are 3 verses about recovery that also speak to me that I'd like to share with you guys. Hold on, the screen just cleared away. Technical difficulties, one moment. Let me get it back. Thank you for your patience. I have 8 drafts of this. Thank you for the patience of the people that put on this event, by the way. We're reading from draft number 8. Okay, here we go. Okay, here we go. The 3 verses about recovery that speak to me. Ephesians 4:32. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. 2 Corinthians 2:5-8. Now if anyone has caused pain, he has caused it not to me, but in some measure, not to put it too severely, to all of you. For such a one, this punishment by the majority is enough. So you should rather turn and forgive and comfort him, or he may be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. So I beg you to reaffirm your love for him. And finally, Colossians 3:13, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgive each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so that you must also forgive. I'm speaking now to anyone in the room who is still in this system or on paper. I want you to know that I see you, and I feel you, and I understand. Your emotions are valid, and your struggles are real. The 5 years that I was on probation, I became known as the email guy because I would vent my rage either to POs and treatment providers or sometimes skip the chain of command, writing directly to their superiors. Now, some of you know this, but the POs have a weekly meeting every week where they discuss our cases. It's true. It's absolutely true. Okay. So basically, I was told that my most raging email to the captain was put up on the big screen for all of them to read. Not my proudest moment. So my biggest commitment right now is not to write any more emails like that today. So that's the reason that I'm taking this coin right here. Another personal victory in a very painful and personal battle for me is the dating site. So I'm taking a 6-month coin today for my 6-month victory over dating sites. On December 1st, I will be celebrating 5 years as a resident at Free on the Outside. So I just want to give a big thank you to Mike, everyone who founded this program, everyone who keeps this program alive today. You started something special with this ministry and with this housing program that is changing lives every day. I am humbled before God to see such grace and love from a group of like-minded men and women and Free on the Outsiders who welcomed me through the doors on a fateful Christmas in 2014. And I played out that service with the final farewell. So we are going to get a live performance tonight. I'm going to play the final farewell for you, just like I did on that Christmas 5 years ago when I was welcomed to the door. And then we'll read the Serenity Prayer together. So. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you'll make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen.